Hello and welcome to Mind Matters, and today we're going to be talking about emotional eating. Firstly, I'm going to outline what emotional eating is and how to recognise when you're eating from an emotional perspective. I think it's something that we all do to a greater or lesser degree. Then looking at what you can do about it and how you can actually treat that in an ongoing way. So our relationship with food is something that's set up very, very early on. It starts in the womb, and our relationship with our mothers and the way that we were fed as babies and as growing children has an impact on that relationship and how it develops. So this is maybe something that, as an ongoing part of your reflective working with yourself, it would be interesting to have a look at. And obviously you can delve into that to a greater or lesser degree. So if you want to dive into that, it can be interesting to have conversations with your mother, if she's still alive, to maybe think about, reflect on the kind of relationship that you have or had with her as a child, and maybe as an adult if she's still living now. It may be that that's something that you've never really considered, and that may have had an impact on your relationship with food and how you go about eating. It's certainly something that in my practice, when I meet with people, that I would be exploring, and I would also be exploring eating within the family and the patterns of food and the messages around food that we receive as children growing up, because although we may not be consciously aware of those, they are significantly important in terms of how that relationship with food develops and how able we are as individuals to enjoy food and enjoy that process of enjoying eating food on our own, but also enjoying food with the family and with friends and in a social context without feeling anxious about the process of eating and what we're eating, and obsessing over calories and fat content or salt content or whatever it may be. So we live in the West and we are surrounded by food. We have an absolute excess of food and a choice of food. So it's very hard to get away from I suppose that excess and being surrounded by food. So if you go shopping, for example, and you're in a supermarket, there is masses of choice. If you go out to a cafe or a restaurant, there is food around. Social occasions tend to be focused around food. So we often find ourselves eating when we're not biologically hungry. And that really is the key to observing whether or not you're eating or overeating and eating from an emotional perspective. I will usually say to people or suggest to people that it's a really good idea to keep a diary for at least 2 weeks of absolutely everything that you eat and drink. And not only to keep the diary of food and drink, but also to look at when you're eating through the day and what has been happening when you've been eating those foods. So when you look back at that and you use that as part of a reflective process, you will begin to see some kind of pattern with the kinds of foods that you are drawn to eat when you're upset, when you're stressed, when you're in an anxious situation, when you're pressured for time, when there's been an encounter with someone at work, at home, in a personal relationship that felt uncomfortable. Often what we do when we go to food and when we're feeling stressed, it's often the high sugar, high salt, high fat foods that we go for and eat them in a fashion that is not comfortable, is not relaxing. It's often something that you do in the kitchen on your own or in the car when you come out of the situation. I'm just thinking of an example of that from my own personal experience when I was working in community psychiatric practice and visiting a lot of patients who were very disturbed in their own homes. I had a habit of coming out from an assessment with somebody who would be significantly unwell and eating a bar of chocolate in the car as a reward. So, and I say reward because often we set up messages and information to ourselves about the kind of foods that are good and bad, the kind of foods that can be given as a reward, the kind of foods that maybe would be withdrawn as a punishment. And I link that back to what I was saying about the patterns that are set up in childhood, because having at least some time to think back to what it was like eating in your family, what kind of foods were used as a reward, what kind of foods may have been used as a punishment, what kind of foods were denied, what kind of foods were allowed, how you were encouraged to eat, whether you had a choice in what you were eating, whether the food was plated up and you had to eat everything that was on your plate, whether there were things said about food at the table and whether or not you ate, whether you were picky with your food, whether you ate vegetables or didn't eat vegetables, all these kinds of things that are said over and over again in a family context, in a family setting, with people who are very significant in terms of your emotional and psychological development, have an impact on the relationship that you then go on to develop with food and your ability or inability to eat in a relaxed way. Stress plays a massive, massive part. And I think when you're doing the diary, which is something that I'd highly recommend for everyone to do who is having some difficulty or struggling with overeating, undereating, so withholding food or using food as a way of comforting, or not feeling an emotion, an uncomfortable emotion which comes up. So to go back to what I was saying about when you do the reflective process, you do the diary, and you look back through the day and you think, oh yeah, I ate 2 bars of chocolate, or I had a great big hot chocolate and a muffin, for example. What triggered that? What was it that happened? What happened immediately before? And who were you with? What was the conversation like? Did it feel comfortable? Were you feeling in any way anxious or uncomfortable in that setting? It's beginning to become much more aware and tuned in to those subtle things that may be happening that up until this point have been completely out of your conscious awareness. Most of what we think and do is not in our conscious awareness. It's automatic, it's habit, and it's something that we've always done. Same with the thoughts that we have each day, the tens of thousands of thoughts that we have every day of our lives. A big percentage of those are repetitive thoughts, so they're exactly the same thoughts as you thought yesterday and the day before and the day before that. And a lot of those thoughts are, it's estimated, at least 70%, but possibly closer is around 80 to 85% of those thoughts are actually out of our conscious awareness. So just consider that for a second. You know, if 80% of what we think and therefore do, because our behaviour is informed by the instantaneous thought, you know, we have a thought in a fraction of a second, and that then creates an emotion, a feeling that we then can act on. And that may be this emotional eating, this mindless eating, this eating without awareness. So once you've recognised that and you've logged possibly where that might be happening, the kind of people that it may be happening around, the particular triggers for you, the stress triggers for you, the times when someone has the ability or you've given them the power to push a button in you and you've reacted to that button being pushed. Those are the things to then be mindful of. And once you are aware of them, you have a choice. You have a conscious choice as to how to respond. In that previous state, when you've not realised what's happening, you've not been aware of those patterns that are within you, you've just reacted to the thought and to the emotion. And this happens in a fraction of a second. So it's, when I'm talking about it now, it may sound as though you would be able to realise that, but actually most of what I'm talking about is completely out of our awareness. So it happens, we have the thought, we have the feeling, we respond. And mostly up until this point, people haven't really thought about that. So this whole internal dialogue, this inner world that goes on all of the time, what I'm encouraging you to do is to start to become more aware of that, more mindful of that, and to create a space, albeit a small space. In a small space, a second, a couple of seconds, you have an opportunity to step back from the emotion, to recognise that uncomfortable feeling, and to realise that you have a choice in how you respond to that feeling. So if you're eating to push that feeling down rather than allowing it to bubble up to the surface, all you're doing is using the food as a way of managing an uncomfortable feeling. And what you need to do to work out how to do in the longer term is how to process, how to allow that feeling, how to acknowledge that feeling and maybe release it through breathing, through meditation, through using affirmations, whatever you choose. And it's always a good idea to have a whole range of things in your toolbox, I would say. Meditation is a great place to start, and by meditation what I mean is just having periods of stillness and quiet time within the day, starting with maybe 5 minutes, when you just observe your body, how your body is feeling. You check in with your body, with the different parts of your body on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a mental level, and you observe without judgment. And that really is a key to improving your relationship, not only with yourself but with food and with others, because being kind to yourself, acknowledging that, you know, there is a shadow side, there are things that are challenging for us, there are things that are difficult for us, but you are doing the best, always doing the best with what you have. And so not getting into that circle of beating yourself up, of criticising yourself, because often the roots of this behaviour come from someone doing that to you in the past anyway. That could be within your family, it could be at school with a teacher, it could be some kind of other emotional experience that you've gone through that has in some way made you internalise those feelings in a way that you don't feel good about yourself. When you feel good about yourself, when you feel good about your body, when you can express love and kindness and compassion to yourself and with yourself, then actually these patterns disappear, because there is no need for them when you're in a place where you feel good about you and you are able to be accepting of yourself, of where you are now, albeit endeavouring to maybe change or maybe improve certain aspects of who you are and yourself. So maybe just a few thoughts now. So we've looked at what emotional eating is and how to start to recognise that. I'm just going to say a little bit about some of the other hungers that we have, and I think that's very important to be asking yourself when you reach for food and you know that you're not biologically hungry because you've eaten a meal an hour before or even 2 hours before. So you are not hungry biologically. You may be thirsty, so having a drink may be a good idea, having some water, having a herbal tea, having something which takes that thirst down, but you are not hungry for food. So an important question to keep asking yourself is, what am I hungry for? What am I hungry for? If it's not food, what is it that I need? What is it that I need to feed me? on another level other than a physical level with food. So that can be recognition, it can be touch, it can be love, it can be acknowledgement, it can be a whole range of things. I mean, those are some of the common drivers. Recognition, not being acknowledged, being overlooked, feeling criticised, feeling belittled, feeling humiliated. All of those feelings are at some level our choice to feel, because no one can make you feel something. You have to give permission for that person to make you feel like that. So someone may make an unkind comment, a critical comment. They may put you down and you feel small as a result of that. But why do you feel small? Somewhere inside you there will be a seed of that. There'll be an old wound of that. There'll be something, again, that often comes from your childhood or from a trauma, an emotional trauma. These emotional traumas and wounds are not like physical wounds. Obviously, if you break your leg, damage your back, there's a very physical manifestation of that, and often it's visible. With emotional and psychic wounds, these are things that have happened to us in the past, and they stay with us until we get to a point where we acknowledge them and we recognize them, and we can then choose to consciously let them go, to release them. And that's all part of a healing pattern, a healing process, that working on this journey of looking at emotional eating, of looking at eating mindlessly and eating unconsciously is part of. So keeping a diary, looking at what happens, recognizing what happens, acknowledging what happens, noticing the triggers, seeing what you can do to reduce those triggers, avoid the triggers, and create space between the event and the reaction, which is you reaching for food. Distraction is something else that you can use at that point where you feel tempted, or an urge or a compulsion to eat, to do something else, to start to find other ways that you can satisfy yourself, and starting with things that focus on self-love and self-care are a really important part of that. So it may be that you go for a walk, it may be that you call a friend, it may be that you sit down with a cup of tea, it may be that you have a stretch, it may be that you listen to some great music, or read a book, or look at a magazine, or watch something funny on TV or a film. Any of those things are things that you can choose to do. But in the moment, it's really important to just take a step back and breathe. To feel your body on the ground, your feet on the ground, the chair beneath you, or lay on the floor if you're feeling really overwhelmed, and feel the earth and the floor supporting you. And breathe from the belly, in and out through the nose. And maybe do that for 2 or 3 minutes, and just allow the breath to settle. And every time your mind goes wandering off somewhere, just very gently draw it back to the breath and to your observation of that breath. Focusing on the out breath will really calm and soothe your central nervous system and bring things back into balance. And when you're focusing on the breath, you really can't be focusing on anything else. So again, doing a few minutes a day of breath work while you observe your physical body and how that feels, again, is an important part of self-awareness, and something that over time you can train yourself to use excuse me, very effectively. So other things just to look that you could maybe do in the meantime, just a few little tips. I would say, once you begin to recognise what's happening, how it's happening and why it's happening, You can bring more of a routine into the way that you eat. So eating regularly, only eating sitting down, trying to eat with people and on your own, so experimenting with that and seeing what happens with both situations. But when you're eating, again, really observing where your mind goes. So when you eat, try to be as present as you can with that plate of food, with that mug of tea, with that bowl of soup, whatever it is. Really be present. Don't do anything else when you're eating. Don't read. Don't have the radio on and be listening to that. Experiment with just focusing on the food and really noticing that plate of food. And again, noticing your behaviour once the food is there. Sit back, observe it, observe the colours, the textures, the beauty of the food. And think about, if you're preparing that food, what you've put into it. So again, where your mind has been while you've been preparing the food. Be present, be mindful in your food prep, but also in the way that you eat food. Don't shop when you're really hungry, and don't wait to eat until you're really hungry. So make sure that you have healthy, nutritious snacks. And if you do have a really bad day with your food, then just start again the next day. You know, every day is a new beginning. And again, just be kind with yourself. Start again the next day. Start with a good intention, and don't beat yourself up about what went the day before. Every day really is a new beginning, and this beginning to become more aware of your inner world, your thoughts, and the link between the thoughts and the feelings and the behaviour is something that once you've started that process and you begin to notice, there really is no going back. So this is the start of a journey of healing and recovery from those patterns of abuse, of addiction, of compulsion, and of self-loathing, which is very often what those journeys are all about, to a greater or lesser degree. So I hope that's been helpful. If you want to find me on Facebook, my page is Self Development Leicester, and I will be back with another aspect of Mind Matters very soon. Thank you for watching.